Chapter 2. You better believe I didn't sleep well the night before my training. I'd been putting it off for a reason. As far as I knew, I only had the power to drain people's life forces, and I only did that when my own life was in danger. Champagne had told me she could help me control that, and more. I didn't know what she meant by more, and that's what scared me. If I had my way, I would get rid of that power altogether. I suppose Champagne's training was the next best thing, though. I woke up before the sun rose and headed downstairs. It was weird living in Rockney's house without him. The house had been battered by the island's giants a month ago, but Rockney had magically repaired it before he died. Astrid and her mom lived here as well, but they had done so for over a decade. In fact, this was the only house Astrid had ever lived in. Even after Rockney's evil nature was revealed, she couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Shay, on the other hand, had another house on the mainland. She'd lived right across the street from me, in fact. She said she needed a home away from the craziness of this island, which I totally understood. The main reason I'd decided to move to the island was to get away from the blandness of the real world. The only things I missed were my best friend Estevan and my parents. I could still see all three whenever I wanted, though. I also missed books, music, and movies. Dargo Island had a very nice plaza with shops and restaurants. There were no movie theaters, but Victor had a nice home theater in his house, which was just across the street from me. My favorite place on the island would have to be the bookstore in the plaza. Though I had adopted e-books over the past few years, I still enjoyed a good physical book every now and then. I'd even considered getting a job at the store. In fact, that store was the very place where I met the island's queen, Anila. Her father had been alive at the time, before the giants killed him, so she'd only been princess then. She'd tried to warn me about Rockney, but I didn't believe her. If I had, I might have been able to avoid all the bloodshed that followed. Anila's dad would probably still be alive. After I got downstairs, I walked outside and took stock of the village. There were a few other mini mansions in the U-shaped neighborhood, but most of them were empty. The previous owners had passed away over the years, some due to natural causes, others to supernatural ones. Though I'd been given my choice of any of these houses, I didn't have the heart to live in someone else's home. "You're up early," a voice said, scaring the crap out of me. I spun around toward the house and saw Shay standing on the front porch. "Training day," I said, as my heartbeat returned to normal. "And you're afraid you'll fail?" she asked as she tied her robe tighter. "I don't know. Part of the reason I came back to the island after all that Rockney business was because of what Champagne promised. Who wouldn't? I mean, I drained the life from my unborn twin sister, that guy in our neighborhood, and then Rockney." I took a moment because my throat grew suddenly tight, remembering those unfortunate deaths. With the neighbor, I had accidentally drained his life force after saving Shay from a tornado Naoki had sent after her. As for my sister, I'd only found out about her from my mom a couple of weeks ago. That was part of the reason I chose to live on the island. I felt too ashamed to be around my parents after learning what I'd done. Sure, I'd been an unborn child at the time, but still. "I remember when I first met you," Shay said after a surprisingly long silence. "I knew you were special." I laughed. "That's a load of crap. You used to play board games with my roommates. You couldn't have possibly known I was special then." She laughed too. True, I didn't know then, but when you sacrificed yourself to save me from that tornado, and even before you came back to life, I knew you were a hero. She let that sink in. Not to toot my own horn, but I was very brave that stormy day months ago. My point, she went on as the sun rose, is that you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You saved Dargo Island and you cured my daughter of her curse. Training with champagne should be a walk in the park compared to all that other stuff. I smiled. Shay's words lifted my spirits. Thank you, I said. I guess you would know what it's like to be a hero, being a doctor and all. She nodded. It was one of the scariest decisions I'd ever made. I don't regret it, though. I like helping people, on and off the island. I guess Astrid is a lot like you, I slid in, with the nature demon training. She gave me a sly look. I know what you're doing. You're trying to convince me she made the right decision. She's a young woman who spent most of her life locked up as an old woman. She wants to get out there and see the world, take on responsibilities. You can't possibly fault her for that. We sat in silence for a while. Then Shay got up and went back inside without another word. An hour after my conversation with Shay, Champagne stepped out of her house and crossed the grassy median that separated the neighborhood. I'd stayed on the porch the whole time, simply waiting for her. Before she'd showed up, I'd been in a half-doze on the porch bench, the gentle sounds of the island relaxing me. The sun barely filtered through the small trees that lined the median and felt warm on my face. All of that relaxation went out the window the moment Champagne showed up. I expected my nose to start bleeding, as it usually does whenever I get overwhelmingly scared, but it hadn't bled in weeks. Sure, I'd had a relatively peaceful existence since Rockney's death, but I was still surprised I hadn't had an episode lately. Ever since I'd cured Astrid of her aging curse, I felt a little different. I couldn't put my finger on why, though. Good morning, sugar dumpling, Champagne greeted. The time has finally come. Are you ready? I suppose I am. I guess I don't have a choice. Champagne suddenly looked like she'd been slapped. You most certainly do have a choice. In fact, you made that choice when you returned to us. I nodded. She was right, of course. When I returned Estevan to the mainland, I stayed on the magical blue train that acted as sole transportation to and from the island. I'd come to the decision there and then to learn to control my Gelfin powers. Thinking of that gave me the courage to stand up. I'm ready, I said. We took a cart to a part of the island I hadn't been to before. When I first came here, I'd pretty much stayed on one side of the island, close to the train station. I'd only seen the village and Dargo Plaza. Just past the plaza was the palace, where Queen Anila lived. I'd almost felt like I was still in Dallas, with all the familiar-looking shops and houses. Until yesterday, I hadn't seen much of the other side of the island, with all the open landscapes. Champagne drove us to an open valley that stretched as far as the eye could see. This was more like it. This was what I'd wanted to see. We parked at the top of a hill and stared down at the valley. I noticed a few animals I'd never seen before. They looked like flamingos, except they were blue instead of pink. The flock was drinking from a pond. Are those floxen? I asked. Yes. How did you know? Astrid told me about them yesterday, after we saw the red bird. When I heard the name, I immediately thought of a flock of birds. You're very astute, Champagne said sarcastically. I stuck my tongue out at her. Okay, coach, what's first? First, a few questions. If a friend came to you with a problem, crying their eyes out, what would you do? I groaned reflexively. Champagne's eyes narrowed with curiosity. What? I asked. Why did you groan just now? It was the thought of someone crying about their problems. I kinda hate that. Why? Does it matter? I wouldn't have asked if it didn't, Sugar Poppy. I sighed and said, I just don't like hearing about people's problems that make me sad, or ones they always bring on themselves. Like, for example, Esteban constantly complained about his girlfriend. They kept breaking up and getting back together. Every few weeks he complained about her. I got sick of it. So you don't like helping people? I like helping people, I said defensively. I just don't like hearing people complain. Does that make me a bad person? Not at all. I do think, however, that your inability to sympathize with people is linked to controlling your power. In other words, I can keep from sucking the life out of people if I can become tolerant of their whining? I'm saying, she said slowly, that you need to become more patient. That made sense when she put it that way. The thought of listening to Esteban's dumb girlfriend problems again filled me with dread, but they were currently broken up, and he hadn't mentioned her in months. I guess I can do that, I said. What's next? Do you like kids? No, I repeated automatically, and then covered my mouth. Is that bad? Not really. I don't care for them either. That's probably why my husband and I never had any. You're married? I asked. She'd never mentioned a spouse before, and I suddenly realized I didn't know much about her. I was once, a long time ago. Harold died during one of the wars between Nauki and Rockney. Rockney convinced me it was his brother's fault, and that's why I sided with the wrong man. We stood silently for a few seconds. So, she continued, does that mean you don't want kids in the future? I'm 19. Do I have to decide that now? You're still 19? When do you turn 20? On my birthday? Champagne took a moment to process that I'd just made a joke. She smiled slyly. My parents had me when they were 19, I said. I think that might be why I can't imagine having kids anytime soon. I want to live my life more. My parents were so busy raising me. Sometimes I wonder if they resent me. You are so silly, Champagne said. They don't resent you. From what you've told me, they've always loved you. I guess. Speaking of having kids, what do you think of Astrid? I did a double take. What do you mean? Do you like her? As a friend, yeah. Not more than a friend? Am I supposed to? Champagne shrugged. I'm just saying that you're both single and the same age. You would make a great couple. Anila and I are the same age too. I grinned. I think she's already taken by that hot guard of hers, Reese. Wait, do you like Anila more than a friend? No, I said, and meant it. Besides, there has to be more to it than that. There has to be attraction. I'm not attracted to either one of them. I don't believe in insta-love. Insta-love? Yeah, you know, in movies and books, where the main characters automatically fall in love without even getting to know each other. Champagne gave me the side eye, reminding me of the way my mom used to look at me when she knew I was lying. Only this time, I wasn't lying. Can we get back to the lesson? I asked. Patience, she said in a sing-song voice. I took a deep, calming breath and said, I want to kill you so badly right now. Champagne laughed. We stood at the top of the hill for a quiet moment, looking down at the beautiful Floxen in the valley. Champagne broke the silence with, Why are you really here, Josh? Deep down, I knew she wasn't referring to why I was standing with her now. I like it here, I said after way too long. What about your friends and family? What about your stuff? I've been slowly moving my stuff from my parents' house for weeks. Champagne gave me a look that told me she'd noticed how I skirted over the important part. I love my family. I just don't feel comfortable around them anymore. Not after what my mom told me about what happened to my twin sister. That wasn't your fault. I didn't respond. I knew it wasn't my fault and that I was being dramatic. The very thing I hated about other people. Huh. That realization was refreshing. I suddenly understood Champagne's point. I was no better than anyone else. I had the same problems and feelings as just about everyone on this planet. Okay, I said. I feel like I'm making progress. What's next? Champagne shrugged. That's it. What? I have nothing more to teach you. I looked around the vast landscape. Then why did we come here? I like watching the Floxen. Speaking of the Floxen, the birds started getting anxious. Something was disturbing them. I wonder. Champagne stepped closer to the valley, mesmerized. The Floxen looked like they were dancing in place. It was oddly beautiful. Until it wasn't. The Floxen started running towards Champagne and me. Should we move? I asked. Move? Champagne asked, distracted. Like, run. Honey, I haven't run in decades. The Floxen grew closer. Champagne merely stood there, clearly nervous but still in control. I stood next to her. I wasn't about to leave my friend to get trampled alone. Champagne was small and skinny. If I really tried, I probably could have picked her up and run for dear life. Before I could even move toward her, the Floxen crested the hill and surrounded us. I hugged Champagne to protect her from the creatures. The sound was tremendous. It was like lying on track while a train passed over us. I closed my eyes and waited to be trampled. And then another fear grabbed me. What if I nearly died and Champagne didn't? Did I have enough training to keep from leeching the life from her? I didn't know the answer, but I did know I would never forgive myself if I hurt her. Before I knew it, the stampede was over. The Floxen had run around us without touching us. I watched them for a second before turning back to the valley from which they'd come. I saw a solitary red bird standing below, its head cocked at me.